Welcome back to Econline, everyone. And in this lesson, we're going to look at the multiplier effect and multipliers in general. In a unit on fiscal policy, multipliers are probably one of the more difficult concepts for students to grasp. So we're going to walk through it here real simply, step by step, and hopefully it should be clear for you. So the first thing we want to look at when we talk about multipliers is kind of reference back to our study of aggregate demand. And we talked about how we know that the government can increase aggregate demand by increasing its spending. So when the government buys goods and services, that's more spending in the economy overall, and therefore we see AD shift to the right. But there's a catch to that, which is that each time the government spends money, that dollar can actually create more aggregate demand than just $1. And the reason is that when the money is spent, somebody receives the money, and that money then becomes income from them. They're going to turn around and spend that money, and that becomes somebody else's income, and a fourth and a fifth person, and so on. So it just goes on in ever-widening circles until there's really just pennies left. And so ultimately, a $1 increase in aggregate demand can have, or a $1 increase in government spending can have a very large effect on aggregate demand. And that's what we call the multiplier effect. You can see it illustrated here, where we have our initial AD, and then the government spends, let's just say $50 billion, and so AD moves up to AD2. And then because of other people's spending, so in other words, let's say they spend that money to build a road. When the construction companies receive that money, they turn around and pay their employees with it. Now those people have income, so we know that somewhere along the way there's going to be some additional spending, and that's what brings us to AD3. The question becomes, how much is AD going to shift when we have some kind of initial change in government spending? And the thing that we have to understand about that is how much money people are actually saving and spending. Because if you think about the example I've given, I pointed out to the idea that someone receives money and they turn around and spend it. But we know that people don't spend every single penny, they don't save every single penny. And with each dollar that we have, those are really our only two options. If you have a dollar, you can either save that dollar or you can spend that dollar, or somewhere in between if you want to save a quarter and spend 75 cents. So the thing that we look at when we discuss the spending multiplier is how much of that additional money that government spends, or what we call marginal, how much of that additional money is going to be spent. So the concept that you'll hear is marginal propensity to save and marginal propensity to consume. So again, marginal meaning additional, propensity is like a likelihood, and then save. So if you receive some extra money, how much of that money are you going to save? The marginal propensity to consume is the exact same thing, except it's dealing with consumption and not savings. So again, suppose you receive an extra $10,000. How much or what percentage or what portion of that money are you going to spend instead of save? So because every dollar is either being saved or it's being spent, or at least some fraction of it, then MPC plus MPS must equal 1. And let's just look at a very simple example. Let's just say that you receive an additional $100 of income from work this month, and you decide to put $10 into your savings account, and then the rest of the money goes into your purse or your wallet, and you end up spending it. So what's your marginal propensity to save? So it's just going to be the $10, the fraction of the income saved, over the 100 additional. All right, so if you had received an extra $100, and that's what we have down here, and you had chosen to save 10 of it, then your marginal propensity to save is equal to 0.1. That is your MPS, marginal propensity to save. By default, we know that your marginal propensity to consume has to equal 0.9, because if you added the two together, they would equal 1.0. Again, all the money you have is either saved or spent. So if you are going to save roughly 10% of it, or 0.1, then you're going to have to be spending 0.9. So moving on to our next topic with the multiplier, then, is the actual formula itself. Now, I've given you two different ways to calculate it here, and there are really two ways of saying the same thing. So the formula for the multiplier is 1 divided by 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, or just 1 divided by MPS. And I want to note here that it's the fraction of additional income that is removed during each round. And that removal is important because we're going to look at different kinds of multipliers later on. And we're going to talk about that where that multiplier comes from and why it's got to do with what's being removed. Now let's take a look at some examples here. Now we know that and we'll do the first one together and then I'll pause. So if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.5, what is the multiplier got to be? So you have two ways of doing this. You can choose either one of the formulas. It doesn't matter which. I usually just do the MPS because it's a step faster. You can do it in your head as you go. If MPC is 0.5, we also know that MPS is 0.5. So it's just going to be 1 divided by 0.5, and the multiplier is 2. What does that mean? Well, it just means that for every dollar that the government spends, aggregate demand is going to increase by $2 in this case. Go ahead and take a minute to pause the video and answer the rest of these questions and see what numbers you're able to calculate.